Hey guys, Darren Miles Photography, based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. Time has come to finally draw a conclusion between the Leica M10 P with the Voigtlander 75 versus the Sony A7IV with the Sigma 85mm f1.4 Art Series lens, the new version with the aperture ring. And without getting into too much detail here, what we're going to do is we're going to go into Lightroom and we're going to compare some close-ups of these two cameras, the finished results of these two cameras. These are all going to be raw files with some slight adjustments, mainly for exposure. And then we'll check sharpness, etc. And just keep in mind that with a Leica camera, the slightest bit of movement, if you're not doing continuous AF, which you can't on a Leica, you may get slightly softer images, but also keep in mind that there aren't a whole lot of people out there, except for your harshest critics and the most detail-oriented of people, that may zoom in 2, 3, 4, 500% to discern the differences between these two cameras and these two lenses. At the end of the day, both are very capable cameras, but what I want to do now is I want to let you decide. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to take into Lightroom, and this will conclude the Leica M10P versus the Sony A7IV comparison. Comment down below, tell me what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks much, guys, and enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, so what I wanted to do in Lightroom is just kind of quickly show some of the differences between the super modern as it gets Sony A7IV versus the old school, deliberate, as I've mentioned 100 times during the video when we were out there, old school, deliberate Leica M10P Safari. Great camera, but just understand you have to work within its limitations, and the Leica will only give you what you put into it, whereas the Sony is so automated, it does so much for you. It's like, I mean, it just does everything. So what I want to show you here real quick, I pulled out quite a few examples. There's 38 of them here, but I'm going to go really fast. First few here, this first one here was shot on the Sony. And again, what's so great about the Sony's autofocusing system, and if you're using sharp glass at all, and this is the Sigma 85mm f1.4 Art, if you've not had the opportunity to use that lens, let me tell you right now, it's special. I think it's right up there with the G Master. It might even be better, in my opinion. Not to mention the fact that it's light, it's much less expensive, yada, yada, yada. But anyway, this is taken with the Sony A7IV and the Sigma 85. And you can see that's pretty darn sharp. Doesn't get much sharper than that. And next to it here, this is a shot taken with the Voigtlander 75. And you can see that close-up details. And mind you, you can get better sharpness than this with the Voigtlander 75. And I'll show you an example later on from the same shoot, or from the same shoot that we did here. But what I want to point out to you here is that the thing about the Voigtlander, because it's not automated and it's totally manual, and I mentioned this when we were outside, if you hate perfect, you'll love Leica. Because when you do actually get a shot with the Leica camera, I think it's better. The problem is getting the shot is extraordinarily difficult, and it's just not nearly as automated and as precise as the Sony is. Just do a quick comparison on these. On the left, we have the Leica M10. On the right, we have the Sony. Zooming in way more than anybody ever should. We're at, what are we at, 300% zooming in here. You can see that the Sony's eye is clearly sharper. In fact, it's pretty obvious that it's sharper. That's just one example. But again, I'm going to show you some examples later on that make the Voigtlander look pretty good. So, and I'll get to that here in a minute. Just another example out here at the train track. By the way, I'm using a new Mac Studio, which is great. The downside is my monitor won't be coming for weeks because Apple is way behind. It's going to take like 4 months to get it. So I'm using a substitute screen right now, and it doesn't render these pictures quite as sharp as they could be. This looks a little bit pixelated to me, but I'm telling you right now, this is tack sharp. That's also the Sony. Okay, so moving on here to the second area that we did next to the train, coming out of the train car. You can see with the Sony here, we're at a pretty good distance from her, and it just doesn't get any sharper than this. Once again, the Sony just locks onto the eye. The Sigma 85mm f1.4 is just stupid sharp. It's just a great lens. I really love working with it. Here's an example of the Voigtlander, zoomed in at 300%, just like the Sony, and you can tell that it's not as sharp. But again, this isn't necessarily because the Voigtlander 75 is bad. Far from it. It's a great lens. It's just so hard to nail focus perfectly because that slice of focus out there in three-dimensional space, it's actually in focus, that little plane is so narrow that if I move it all, or if the model moves it all, or if I'm just slightly adjusting the focus a little bit, it can render the shot out of focus, which is too bad because, but again, who's gonna zoom in 300% like this? Probably nobody, and from a distance, the picture looks fine. Let's see. Here's an edited example. Give you an idea as to what we have here. This was taken with the, which one was this taken with? Let's see, this was taken with the A7IV. And again, it's just crazy sharp. This one was taken with the Leica M10 P, and you can tell the sharpness isn't as bad here as it, or rather it's better here than it was in the other, but it's still not as sharp as the Sigma. In fact, it's technically not really even close. Again, later there's one shot or two shots that I got that were perfect, but it's just a testament again to how difficult it is to find perfect focus with wide aperture glass when you're utilizing a Leica. Now, in fairness to Leica, it really wasn't designed to do this. I kind of like using it for this. I like using it for big landscapes as well. But portraiture, slow moving portraiture where you can slow down and be deliberate, the Leica can be a lot of fun, but it can still be frustrating to use. What you'll find yourself doing is instead of shooting wide open, maybe you'll stop down. Instead of f1.5, maybe I'll stop down to f2, and my likelihood of getting the shot in focus increases rather dramatically. Still get good subject isolation, but this was a wide open test. I wanted to compare the Sigma 85 at 1.4 and the Voigtlander 75 at f1.5, again, utilizing the A74 and the M10 P. So anyway, as you can see, it's still pretty sharp. It looks pretty good to me. Okay. This one here was taken with the M10. This is an example where the focus actually was almost perfect. In fact, I would argue to say at this point, this particular shot was pretty much perfect. You can see this is a raw file. Going over to the develop setting, as you can see, we did some minor adjustments here because it was getting dark, and we did have a light on her, but it wasn't strong enough to illuminate. But you can see that that's pretty darn sharp, and that's with the Voigtlander. I'm pretty happy with that one. And then going here, this is the Sony, which is even sharper. The Sony and the Sigma are just stellar. I tell you, if you like 85mm lenses, boy, that Sigma is something else. This is just a great picture, in my humble opinion. This is taken with the Sony also. I actually didn't capture this angle with the Voigtlander and the Leica. I don't know why, but I just love this picture. I think it's beautiful. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I want to show you the progression of this picture. So this is the raw file. And then we did some frequency separation, which is just a minor little adjustment. You can barely see it. Took out a few imperfections. It's just a light skin adjustment. And then I did the full-blown edit. I added some steam because I wanted it to look like a vintage train station. We sharpened her eyes quite a bit. We photoshopped her face, as you can tell. But I think that looks pretty cool. Again, that's just my biased opinion coming in there. And then let's see, this one here, this is also taken with the Sony, right? Let's see. Yeah, that was taken with the Sony. I want to show you an example that was taken with the Leica. Okay, here's a Leica example. This is pretty good, by the way. Check out the sharpness here. That's pretty good. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you can see there's a little bit of shake, or maybe she's moving a little bit, but you can see that's pretty sharp. Once again, I very like frequency separation. It's really hard to see it, but it's really subtle. When you do frequency separation, if you're not familiar with that in Photoshop, super subtle, super subtle. And then I went in, edited her face, added the steam again. Again, I wanted to give it that vintage feel, like we were in an old train station. So that's why the steam is there. All right, moving on. Let's see, that's just another, oh, here's an example with Sony. Check this out. So once again, the 85 1.4 Sigma with the Sony, I mean, it's just crazy. Technically, this is almost perfect. And then a little frequency separation, and then boom, steam and full-blown facial retouching. And I think that just looks pretty awesome. But again, I'm biased. If you love it, great. If you don't, I totally understand. Let's see, moving on. All right. This is taken with the Sony. This is outside at night on 5th Avenue. What we wanted to show here is the bokeh quality. This is the Sony, and you know, the bokeh, you're gonna get cat's eye towards the edge. That's pretty typical right there. But again, sharpness, pretty stellar. Subject isolation, rendition is just beautiful. All right, and then moving on to the Voigtlander. As you can see, not quite as sharp, but again, is anybody really going to zoom in 300? Does that picture right there not look sharp to you? If you zoom in, this is what it takes these days to come up with differences between different lenses and cameras, right? And again, just remember, we're manually focusing the entire time with the Voigtlander. Let's see. Again, pretty sharp, not great, not bad, but pretty sharp. Okay, this is one of those examples where we actually caught it almost perfectly. So when you zoom in at 300% on this particular photo, you can see that this portrait's just beautiful. Let's see. Yeah, towards the end here, we were almost nailing it perfect with the Voigtlander, which is, again, very, very hard to do with this camera and lens combo. That's actually that is perfect. This isn't a great example though. Sony and the Sigma, shot after shot after shot, we're just nailing it. 100%, almost 100% of the time. Eye sharp, in focus, amazing. The Leica, it's just a process. You know, you might get lucky and get this, but again, the slightest little movement by the photographer or the subject, and shooting at a shallow depth of field like this, you've got to use a tripod with the Leica, because if you don't, just even pressing the shutter will move the camera slightly and can just push the focal plane just a little bit before or a little bit after the eye. You've got to leave that camera on a tripod. Okay, let's see. These last few shots taken with the Voigtlander are really nice. They're perfect. Let me see. And then with the Sony here, this is pretty sharp, as you can see. I mean, oops, I don't know what just happened there. My computer just froze up. Actually, this is just a result of a slower shutter speed, so it's getting close to the end of the night. This is taken at 1/40th of a second, so even if there wasn't any camera shake, any movement at all will cause just a little bit of blur. And lastly, right there, well, just, you know, in summary, my final thoughts would be this. I don't think there's any doubt that the Sony with the autofocus and the Sigma is absolutely a better way to go if you're interested in sharpness and nailing things almost 100% of the time. But if you're into nostalgia, you want to slow down, take your time with your photos, and really work to get a great exposure. The Leica is an experience. It may not be one that you prefer, but the results, if you nail focus, can be really, really close. So anyway, sound off in the comments below. Thanks.